Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. If you've been following this podcast for a little while, you know I like follow-ups. I like to understand the through lines on some of the guests and organizations and stories that we cover here on Trending in Ed. This is one of those episodes where we're going to begin with a little bit of sound from an interview I did with Ruben Ogbanna, who's a co-founder of a really innovative post-secondary education initiative here in Brooklyn called the Marcy Lab School. It's based really just a couple blocks from me here, and they're doing interesting work with college-age students, generally low-income students from around New York who are looking for something kind of like a boot camp, but more targeting college-age students. They spend a year at the Marcy Lab School, learn how to code, learn how to work together with others, learn how to interview well and to stay on top of what's emerging, get closer to their mission, their why, how their identity can come to bear on their professional lives. And then from there, get placed in hopefully a six-figure plus job and really unlock some genuine economic mobility, social mobility, life-changing access to really the American dream in some ways. I'm going to start with a little bit of sound from Ruben just to give you a little more context around the Marcy Lab School, what his background was, why he founded it. From there, we're going to get more time with two alums of the Marcy Lab School, Jason Paulino and Xhesika Malecaj. Folks like to talk about how inspirational Gen Z is. This is a chance to hear them in their own voice, why they went to the Marcy Lab School, how they discovered it, how they're thinking about kicking off a career in coding, and of course, how that all fits into the rapidly changing contexts around artificial intelligence, how it's impacting coding jobs, and how these young employees who are entering the workforce, how they think about the future of work and how they think about some of the trends out there. It's a really great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe. And with that, we're going to pick up next with a little brief conversation with Ruben about his background and why he founded the school.
That was kind of my first introduction to kind of the college for all philosophy that is really popular amongst some of the highest performing public schools here in New York. It was also there where I came to confront the realities of the college for all promise when not all colleges are prepared to support students to graduate and succeed in the career of their choice. It was my time in charter schools. It was my time as a coach working for Teach for America later on, where I saw what happens when young people end up getting into colleges that they can't afford or getting into colleges that don't have the resources to support them. And I saw year after year, really smart, talented, hardworking young people who got into college but were indebted, or got into college but left before they got a chance to obtain their degree, or obtain their degree, through debt, and were unable to find a really good job. And so that was the motivation behind myself and my incredible co-founder, her name is Malecaj, deciding to pilot, design, and launch the Marcy Lab School to be an aspirational alternative to college for really promising young people who won't benefit from what the best of higher education has to offer in this country.
There's quite a lot to chew on in that conversation. We'll include links to that episode in the show notes for this one. But I also wanted to give time to the conversation with the actual alumni, the actual students who went through this program and have seen a genuine impact on their lives and the lives of their family, and also how much they want to give back, which is a big concept that both Xhesika and Jason hit on here. With no further ado, let's pick up with a conversation with Xhesika Malecaj and Jason Paulino, recent graduates from the Marcy Lab School. Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Always happy to carry a story along through a couple of episodes. We had the founder of the Marcy Lab School, Ruben Ogbanna, on the podcast back in the fall. I'm really happy now to have a couple of graduates of that school, an alternative post-secondary pathway that's right in the hood here, right in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I'd like to welcome Xhesika Malecaj and Jason Paulino to the show. Welcome to Trending in Education.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's great to have you both. And we always start by getting our guests' origin stories. Maybe we'll start with Jessica and then go to Jason after that. Catch us up quickly on who you are and how you got to this point in your professional life. I realize it's kind of early, but also how you landed at the Marcy Lab School and like what that trajectory has been like.
Yeah. So I came to this country when I was 7. I was introduced to coding through a high school program called Script Ed or Code Nation now. I fell in love with coding. I really liked that you could just create projects out of thin air. All you needed was a terminal and some kind of IDE. And I decided to go to college for it. When I went to college, it wasn't the same community and everything like it was in high school. I also think there was a lot of classes that were required that had nothing to do with the job. I ended up majoring in a lot of other things. There was really no direction in college. They kind of let you just major in whatever, so many prerequisites
Hmm.
that after a while, I was just really confused on what I wanted to do. And then one day, I saw an email about the Marcy Lab School, and I was like, you know what? Like, the year is going to pass anyway. Let's just see what happens.
Hmm.
And I was thinking about it as something, if this doesn't work out, at least it eliminates that path. Then I have one less thing that I want to do.
Yeah.
So then I can focus on the other list of things that I might want to do.
What about the Marcy Lab School? What about it
Yeah.
kind of drew you there?
So it was a 1-year program that was a alternative to college, and you were able to learn how to be a full stack developer. And the programming language that you were going to learn was JavaScript, which is something that I learned in high school.
Hmm.
A lot of classes in college teach in Java or Python, which are all great languages, but mainly backend languages.
Yep.
I wanted to be a full stack developer and I wanted to learn as much as I could. I also wanted what drew me to Marcy was the fact that they got you ready for the industry. I think college just gets you ready to pass the classes, to be able to do data structures. But when you actually start working the job, which we'll talk about
Yeah.
more on the where I am now,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Marcy gets you ready for the industry, whether it's how to communicate with people, whether it's how to learn new languages. Marcy prided itself not in teaching you JavaScript or like other boot camps did of like, hey, give us 6 months, you'll be the best JavaScript developer ever. It prides itself in teaching you how to learn. And I think
Hmm.
that's a good skill. At my current job, I actually don't use JavaScript. I use Go.
Yep.
And if all I learned at Marcy was just JavaScript and not how to learn,
Right.
it would have ended up being as successful as it is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I'd
yeah.
love to bring Jason in here too, because like we talk a lot about like durable skills and transferable skills. There's also people have been talking more about the experience gap, where a lot of young folks are graduating from college, but they don't really know how to work. Can you describe what your experience was like when you were at the Marcy Lab School? You know, you're just there for a year. What's your time structured like while you're there?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go through like the whole flow of the day. So in the morning, we start off with basically something called mindful mornings, a little bit of a meditation, something that the Marcy Lab School incorporates, I guess, as its culture. And then once we do that, we get into code challenge, which is basically solving a technical problem using JavaScript or a language of our choice. And then it's kind of the interview style that you apply as you get into the interview process for a job. And then we either go into leadership and development or we get into a technical class, right? That kind of learn. After that, we have lunch and then basically our own time to, we can call it, I think, lab, I believe,
Hmm.
and work on our own stuff. And yeah, I think that's about throughout the whole day.
And then maybe just backing into your story, then how did you find out about Marcy Lab School? Like, how did it land on your radar?
Yeah. So I was actually in college for about 2 years, undecided. The moment I knew I wanted to do computer science, but I didn't know you could apply to the computer science school directly. I went to City College of New York.
Right.
And I'm coming home from failing my calculus 2 test, right? Very sad.
Yeah.
And then I got an email saying, hey, check out the Marcy Lab School. Email from Code Nation, the same program that I just went to. And I just, bit the bullet and, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's basically a boot camp, right? But it's not a boot camp in that y'all aren't typically the type of people who go to traditional boot camps because it's more going after, kind of college age, early career to help you land in that first good coding job. The context you gave there, Jason's really interesting. Like it's gotta feel different. It almost feels like work. I don't know how either of you want to describe the feeling maybe coming out of your experience in higher ed where it wasn't really reaching you. What about this kind of clicked for you in addition to the 1 year turnaround, which I think also probably has some appeal in that, that's the boot camp side of it for me. You're not talking about 4 years, you're talking about a relatively compressed period of time.
Yeah. So first, I think one key component of this is that it's completely free. We have kind of a pay it forward type of situation. I think, Jason, you also went to CUNY, right? Like one thing I support is always like cheap or free education.
Yeah.
So when I heard it was free, I was like, okay, I really like this. So one thing about Marcy is that those little lab periods were really helpful, and I didn't realize how helpful they were because you can do anything. If you wanna slack off, you could technically slack off. Nobody's gonna come in and
Yeah.
tell you like a high school teacher and is like,
Just between the three of us, that's kind of the way work works too. But you
"Yeah,
didn't
yeah."
hear
So
from us. Yeah.
that's what I was gonna say. When I started working, I was like, "Oh, there's nobody that's you just have they won't tell you anything until the
Yeah.
last day before it's due."
It's up to you.
So I think that helped me a lot with time organization. I think a big part of Marcy that's different from any boot camp, that's different from college, that's different from anything, is the community you build. Jason and I are actually really close friends. We just texted each other this morning. He reminded me about the podcast because I am at work and sometimes
Yeah.
time just passes by.
Sure.
And Jason was one of the people that helped me interview for the job I currently have.
Hmm.
So one thing about the pay it forward method is like the sense of build a community and help your community.
Hmm.
Jason's friends going to Marcy now. My brother's going to Marcy now.
Yeah. Hmm.
For example, if you educate someone, they're able to help others. And I think a lot of times with other boot camps or college, it's a very individualistic
Hmm.
kind of mindset.
Hmm.
While in Marcy, like the first thing they teach you is like always try to help someone else. Always think about the community you could help. We don't network just to network and get a job.
Yeah.
We network so we can help someone because getting a job that's in tech, a lot of people come from very low income backgrounds, me included. So it's like this might not be a big deal for a lot of people, but for us it is. And I think we always want to help others.
I think kind of building on that, the 1 year, it's free for the students and their families. And then on the other side, the outcomes are really, the two of you are testimonies to the outcomes where you both have jobs in the industry. Maybe we could pick up a little more what that was like. I also thought it was interesting, Jason, when you were talking about practice interviews as part of your day. Yeah, I think that's kind of the next level insight in terms of the structure there, where that's stuff you don't really know coming in. And if you go to a traditional higher ed, maybe career services thinks about it a little bit, but like it's not kind of baked into the culture, to your point. Maybe picking up with you, Jason, can you talk us through, your trajectory coming out of Marcy, what life's been like since then?
Yeah. So after finishing Marcy for the first year, we had a thing called job seekers, which we kind of go once a week and go on LinkedIn, look at companies. So we have a newsletter as well. We get every Monday, I believe. And Marcy has a partnership program where they partner with different companies. And then some people get selected out to interview for those companies. I got selected for Palo Alto, which is the job I currently have right now.
Hmm.
And just overall fixing a resume, fixing LinkedIn, and really just building a more stronger community with all of us together with the same goal in mind.
Yeah. And then your point about like mission based, frequently that is what makes a hire successful on the other end as well, where, you kind of know who you are, you know what your why is. And then if you can connect that, particularly as a developer, like if you then have kind of a deeper connection to the culture, honestly, kind of like the connection y'all have to Marcy Lab.
Yeah. So one thing about Marcy is we also had an L&D class, which is leadership and development, where we learn about current events or past events, just civil rights and things like that, things that you wouldn't traditionally or at all even learn at a boot camp. One thing that made us all come closer together and just have a community was the fact that we had to write a essay about our life story
Mm,
and how we got here and just like something that affected us.
yeah.
And we all had to read it out to each other in
Hmm.
maybe like the first month. Was it the first month, Jason?
It was about first month, like within the first 3-ish happened weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, imagine like telling one of your deepest, darkest stories to someone. Like I know friend groups that like 4 years in, they still don't know a lot about each other.
Right.
So after that, we ended up all becoming very close. And I think that was like a big part of it. They're always asking for you to bring your identity into it, which again, you would not get in a traditional college.
Right.
If an interview doesn't go well, they're always like, okay, you always have the next. That's not for you. So I like to be as funny as I can. So my interviews, like I would tell jokes or stuff like that. And that's actually when I was interviewing for my current company, which is Cockroach Labs, I said that I really liked the puns that they made. And one of the feedback was that they liked that I liked the puns. And that was
Right.
like a very unique take. They're always trying to get you to show your personality or your culture or
Hmm.
everything. For Thanksgiving, we did like a potluck and people brought like cultural dishes, all of that.
Yeah.
But we're always trying to represent ourselves because at the end of the day, a lot of times in tech, it can be a place that doesn't have representation.
Hmm.
So when we do get there, they want to make sure that we're not erasing our identity and we're
Right.
there and we're proud as people who do come from these backgrounds, but are still in the same place, people who don't.
Yeah. And it's kind of like life-changing economic mobility is also a big part of the mission, right? You're coming from like a low income background, and then within that year, you're kind of on this trajectory to get placed in the six-figure job with upside. Can you expand on that a little, Jason?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about my story a little bit.
Yeah.
I grew up in the South Bronx with a single mother, and what Marcy has brought to my life is honestly incredible. The amount of support that Marcy has had throughout this whole process and the opportunities that I've had throughout this whole year has been really amazing. At the time, my mom didn't believe that, Marcy is something I could do. She was very fixated on college, that's
Yeah.
what she was grew up on. If you don't go to college, that's it. I did a lot of convincing, a lot of convincing to my mother, and she gave in, and it's been really great since then.
Yeah. And then the job, it can really change lives. And then you're paying it forward. So it can really change communities, over time. The other element here is I did mention we might mention AI at some point. So here it is. It is a time where like the disruptions in the world of work, even in the world of tech, are more significant now with some of these new tools that are emerging. As folks that are out there on the cutting edge of this, both in terms of what you learned at the Marcy Lab School and now what you're learning on the job, because really, you're both examples of what any economist or any American rooting for the future would hope that young rising talent are placed in meaningful jobs and are able to kind of make an impact. What's it been like? How do you feel with like the AI on the horizon? There's been a lot of talk, since ChatGPT got plugged into GitHub that suddenly, the role of a developer might be different. I'd love to get a little bit of, each year's perspective on that.
I think it can be a very helpful tool. As someone who has tried to use AI on the job sometimes, I don't think it's going to replace us anytime soon. It can do a little basic questions, but I don't think anytime soon with more complex questions where you need to
Right.
know a whole system and a database.
Yeah. It kind of helps in the iterative process too. Like you have
Yeah. Yeah.
there's another tool in your toolkit. But yeah,
Yeah.
Jason, I'd love to, any thoughts you have?
Yeah, like you mentioned, just another tool in the toolkit. A lot of people are definitely nervous about AI kind of replacing their jobs, more so the new software engineers, right? It's just the tasks aren't that complicated. But as you level up as an engineer and you become more senior like, it becomes, I would assume, a lot more harder to replace, the
Yeah.
real experienced engineer with an AI and stuff. Like I said, it's just, I would see it as like another tool. It's
Mhm.
helped me a lot whenever I have ideas kind of like bounce back, similar to kind of a coworker in a sense.
Yep.
You bounce back ideas, you kind of check whatever your assumptions are. I like it personally. I use it almost every day. I believe, I forgot what the stat is, but I think it's over 50% of code bases now are all written with AI
Yeah.
because of the GitHub Copilot people use a lot often on VS Code.
To
So
me, it kind of speaks back to, when I was talking about the durable skills, which is like knowing how to work on a team, knowing how to manage your time, knowing how to communicate, knowing how to feel part of a community, part of a culture. Like those are durable.
Yeah.
You need kind of experience with that to actually interview well, get a job, and be successful right out the gate. The nature of work, I think, is more what people have to wrap their heads around now that like
Yeah.
work's just going to be changing a lot more. It's not going to be kind of so much of a steady state, but it sounds like, you're almost taught some of that resilience as part of the curriculum as well.
Yeah, I think coming from a non-traditional background, you're kind of taught to like go with the flow and like when the storm comes, we were able to withstand the storm. I think change is a big part of like anyone who's coming from a
Yeah.
non-traditional background.
There's more recognition of how important resilience is. And, even the argument that, in some ways folks are not being taught enough of that, and some of that is just being taught through your own life experiences, frankly. But anyway, looking ahead, where do you see this going? I remember asking Ruben about this. Is this model something that could expand and go beyond and, maybe impact other fields or other communities? I don't know if you have any thoughts about, Marcy Lab's kind of model and, where it might go.
In terms of scalability, I do think they can scale pretty far. Consider what they've done with only, a small group of people. It is getting kind of cramped though within the office. There is now a total of, I think, 4 classes, 2 in each cohort. So it's
Mhm.
getting kind of packed. So they would have to definitely move into a new building. But with the job market at the moment, it is very, very, very tough to even get an interview. But somehow Marcy keeps doing it back to back.
Yeah.
Um, Out there, I hear that it's really bad in the market, but I keep seeing people getting jobs back to back every week here in Marcy Lab School,
Mhm.
which is something that is, insane to me, thanks to
Yeah.
a partnership game.
Yeah. And also that close knit community, there's something to be said for that. And what's impressive to me is that it is able to kind of almost speed that up where, typically that's like a 4-year residential program is what it takes to kind of build those types of bonds. But it does seem like the way these cohorts really kind of come together, kind of what you were talking about, Jess, where you're kind of, really that vulnerability does build teams and really being able to be vulnerable together and kind of be committed together is something that really, can help, especially when times are tough. We're about close to time here. So, any concluding thoughts, any takeaways, any other ideas that you want to get out there? I always like to ask folks if there are other things outside of what we're talking about that's capturing your imagination, things that you think our listeners should be thinking about in this day and age.
I was just gonna say I'm a big proponent of just economic mobility. I think both of us went to a CUNY system, which is also another big contributor to economic mobility.
Yep.
But I think Marcy just kind of cuts that time not even in half, more than half. And I just think it's really important for people to realize that some of the best minds might not be what they could be if not given the opportunity.
Mhm.
And just because someone didn't have the same life circumstances as someone else doesn't mean anything.
And then also to that economic mobility point, getting through this sort of transition to the next level debt free is a
Yeah.
huge piece of it as well, which is part of, CUNY to its credit is where like affordable higher education is potentially available to people. But it's interesting when these alternative models are faster and result really in, a very clear economic mobility upside here. Concluding thoughts for you, Jason?
Yeah, so I guess if anyone wants to be, I guess, a software engineer in today's age, be very, very patient and enjoy the whole process. If you're very focused on the finish line, it's going to get really complicated to finish. So find a passion, within engineering, whether it's the coding aspect or talking to amazing people like Jess, just stick to that. And then by the time you enjoy the whole marathon, you won't even notice you pass the finish line. You pass multiple of them.
Yeah, it reminds me. I was listening to something recently. They were talking about flow states and how being able to kind of make things less complicated and less complex by focusing on things for a long time, less uncertain is something that creates this sense of flow. And in some ways, you have to almost flip your model where if you're taking a long time really being lost in your work, that's actually the goal, and it's almost like you gotta you gotta rewire yourself a little bit. Really amazing stuff here with Xhesika, Malecaj, and Jason Paulino, recent graduates and successful alums of the Marcy Lab School here in Brooklyn. Thanks to both of you for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you, Michael, so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. This was really fun.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. We'll include links to what we talked about on the show page for the episode. Please subscribe, write us reviews, do all the good things, tell your friends. We'll be back soon. This is Trending in Education.